Chuanshu, era, sweet pet, Shuangwen, group pet, stock up, double cleanliness. System. Hello everyone, we meet again. I am your caring dad system. As usual, the opening nosebleeds activate the system. After waking up, bound by the system, prompting a countdown. Wen Lichu. System. There are quite a few host diseases, such as cervical spondylosis, menstrual disorders, uterine colds. Wen Lichu looked embarrassed and said, "Stop." System. Reminder of fund disbursement upon receipt. Wen Lichu looked at the string of zeros prompted on her phone text message and had only one thought. A lot of money, you can buy a lot of food. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for the group favorite aunties in adult pronouns, complete collection download for the group favorite aunties in adult pronouns, latest chapter reading for the group favorite aunties in adult pronouns. Chapter 1. Countdown to the Era. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 1. Countdown to the Era. Late at night, when Lichu felt a slight itching in her nose and unconsciously rubbed it. She didn't take it seriously and turned her head over to continue sleeping. During her deep sleep, a bright red nosebleed flowed down her chin and into her neck, purposefully flowing towards the red mole on her collarbone. At the moment when nosebleeds came into contact with the red mole, the room was enveloped in red light. In just a few seconds, the red light dissipated, and Wen Lichu surprisingly disappeared. In her sleep, she felt a momentary lift into the air, but soon she felt the touch of the bedding in bed, and her originally slightly furrowed eyebrows relaxed. The originally awakened Wen Lichu was once again enveloped by drowsiness. 1 second before her consciousness was engulfed, a cold mechanical sound rang in her ear. The Chuanshu system has been successfully enabled, host binding successful. Wen Lichu's tightly closed eyeballs moved slightly, but just as the system thought she was about to wake up, the slightly moved eyes stopped moving and there was a sound of even breathing. The transparent system interface suspended in mid-air, with several symbols appearing on the ice blue panel. The system didn't know how to wake up Wen Lichu for a moment, and several methods flashed on the ice blue panel. Electric shock, pouring cold water, throwing the host to the ground, performing high-altitude throwing for the host. Of the first three are definitely not working. As for the last one, the system is a bit tempted, but he dare not. To explain, the so-called high-altitude throwing is throwing the host high, then catching it, and repeating it repeatedly until the host wakes up. But it was quickly rejected by the system. Intuition told him that waking up Wen Lichu now would not benefit him at all. More than 90% of young girls have the urge to wake up, and now is the time for deep human sleep. It's strange that he's too late to wake up. The host is not clear, so the tasks to be released next cannot be carried out. There is no way the system can only wait quietly for Wen Li to wake up. In the icy space, there was no sound at all. The system looked at the time and moved Wen Lichu from the large soft bed in space back to the bed in her room. 3 hours later. The biological clock of Wen Lichu has arrived. Just as I woke up, before my brain was fully awake, I suddenly heard a series of mechanical sounds in my ear. Hello host, this is our first time meeting. Please provide more guidance in the future. Next, we will release tasks to the host. The task is as follows. The host has 7 days to prepare, and after 7 days, they will be able to finish reading on time. During this 7-day period, the host can freely purchase things they need in the other world, and the funds will be released to the host later by the system. Funds being disbursed. The funds have been received, please check with the host. The countdown to reading has started, 6 days, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Please prepare as soon as possible, remind the host that the world we are going to next belongs to the fictional world background, which uses the background from the 1970s. The method of using space has been transmitted to the host's mind. Wen Lichu was stunned by one news after another. After listening to the system's words, Wen Lichu felt like she hadn't woken up yet. As soon as she closed her eyes, she fell straight back and smashed herself onto the bed. This action startled the system. A comprehensive inspection was directly provided to Wen Lichu. It turned out she was fine. But there are many physical problems. For example, cervical spondylosis, shoulder periarthritis, not yet severe, arthritis, lumbar disc problems, menstrual disorders, uterine colds, and many other major and minor problems. System. Wen Lichu was able to recover from this exciting news. Staring blankly at the ceiling, "Are you still there?" System. Wen Lichu had already woken up. She just slept and woke up bound by the so-called book reading system. Whoever encountered this would be confused. "How did you get here?" The system replied. The system has always been on the host. Wen Li froze at first and has been there ever since. Isn't she? The system sensed Wen Lichu's thoughts and spoke up. The system was only activated last night, and we don't know much about dealing with the previous host. The host can rest assured. Wen Lichu let out a sigh of relief, which means he doesn't even know about her privacy. That's not true either. In order to better understand the host, there is still some understanding of the host's past system. For example, just now, the system conducted a physical examination of the host and found that there were quite a few problems with the host. Upon hearing the system's words, Wen Li was instantly embarrassed. "Stop it." The system immediately shut up. Accompanying it was a text message reminder from Wen Lichu's phone. Wen Lichu picked up her phone and glanced at it, then her pupils suddenly shrank. The system is somewhat dissatisfied and says. "Funds received reminder, there is a delay in SMS." Wen Lichu looked at the series of zeros on her phone text message. Flowers exploded in my head. My mind is filled with only one idea. A lot of money can buy a lot of delicious food. The system's untimely speech interrupted Wen Lichu's fantasy. "Host, you should get up and wash up now, and then make a plan." Wen Lichu coughed, slightly embarrassed to ease her embarrassment, and said, "I understand. How come the previous host is like this, but the current host is still like this?" The system was somewhat helpless, and roast in his heart. He was stunned by the reaction. How could he have this idea? Before the system could think much, it saw Wen Li appearing in the space, curiously looking around. Wen Li touched herself at first, took a few deep breaths, looked up at the ice blue virtual screen, and asked, "Can this space store living things?" The system was a bit surprised how Wen Lichu could find him all at once. Although he had doubts in his heart, he did not ask. But first answer Wen Lichu's question. "Yes, host." After listening to the system's answer, Wen Lichu's eyebrows were tinged with a smile. Then he said to Wen Lichu. "The system has already ordered breakfast for the host, and the delivery guy will arrive in about 30 minutes. Wen Li was slightly stunned at first, but she didn't expect this system to be so considerate. It's not as cold and aloof as the system in online novels. "Thank you," the system said in a low voice. "You're welcome." Wen Lichu lifted the blanket and got off the bed. She was dressed in a light pink ice silk nightgown, slender, with her white and tender long legs stepping on the clean and soft plush carpet. A black and smooth black long straight hair was draped casually. I walked to the window and pulled open the blackout curtains. At that moment, all the facilities and decorations in the room were clearly visible. Simple, neat, clean, girl, this is what the system sees at this moment. Wen Lichu walked out of the room and went to the bathroom. She first filled herself with bath water, then started brushing her teeth and washing her face. When she finished doing these things, there were nearly 20 minutes left for her to take a bath. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Wholesale Market. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Wholesale Market. When the time is approaching, the system prompts. Host, your takeout will be at the door in 2 minutes. Wen Lichu nodded, changed his clothes, and arrived at the living room. The layout and design of the living room were very simple. After a while, there was a knock on the door. Wen Lichu went to open the door, picked up takeout, and the delivery guy thanked him before closing the door. Taking the takeout to the table and sitting down to open it, Wen Li was stunned when he saw that there was a takeout of her favorite shredded chicken congee. How did he know that he liked this shredded chicken congee, and how did he know what he liked to eat? Looking at this congee, I couldn't help thinking. This system is very easy to use, and it can accurately get to my own preferences. After finishing breakfast, the system reminded Wen Lichu to go out and stock up. After calmly packing up his things, Wen Lichu asked, I see. Is this place we're going to in the 1970s, the south or the north? The system replied. North. Wen Lichu remained silent and walked back to the room in front of the computer. He opened the WPS software and typed in the items he needed to buy for a while. Firstly, things that cannot be lacking include rice, oil, salt, flour, soy sauce, and so on. There are also toiletries, such as laundry detergent, shampoo, shower gel, etc. Try to find some odorless items as much as possible, just in case. By the way, I searched online for some information belonging to the 1970s. Then I opened a certain Juke app and rented 2 warehouses, one in the east and one in the west. After paying the deposit, Wen Lichu opened a certain treasure and a certain east. I placed an order and bought some things that I could buy. Then I printed out what I had written on my computer just now, put a piece of paper in my bag, applied some sun protection and isolation, applied some light makeup, and took the car key before leaving. The system has been quietly watching the series of operations of Wen Li's initial movement. I always feel like I've experienced it before. Without waiting for the system to think much, I saw Wen Lichu coming to the garage where the residents parked their cars in the community. I drove out. Wen Li drove all the way west after leaving the community. The system checked and found a large wholesale market in the west, which has a complete range of items. 60% of the items listed by Wen Li earlier can be purchased here. The system was a bit unexpected. After all, the balance in Wen Li's initial card now has 9 digits. She could easily show off her wealthy demeanor and indulge in extravagant purchases. But she didn't. The first thing she did when she went out was to go to the wholesale market. And it is also one of the largest wholesale markets in this city. After arriving at the wholesale market, Wen Li parked his car, got off the car, and headed straight inside. She spent an hour walking around the entire wholesale market. Then, after screening one by one, I walked through all the remaining stores. I went to the rice shop first. Wen Lichu walked in and the boss lay on the rubber chair, scrolling through the video. He walked over and handed the order to the boss, saying, "Boss, I need these things. Do you have the quantity I need here?" The middle-aged owner of the rice shop put down his phone, took the order handed over by Wen Lichu, and glanced at it. The attitude took a 180-degree turn and said, "Yes, there is, but it will take time." "Boss, do you think you are in a hurry?" Wen Lichu pondered for a moment and said, "I need it no later than tomorrow night." The rice shop owner is a bit embarrassed, but the quantity on the list is even more than he earns in a month. "I need it tomorrow night, so fast, let me think." Wen Lichu remained silent, waiting for the boss's words. After a while, the owner of the rice shop gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, tomorrow night is tomorrow night, but this price." Wen Lichu understood his meaning and said, "I will add more money." The rice shop owner is happy. Today, he has met the big boss. I roughly talked to Wen Lichu about the price of the deposit. Wen Li didn't even think about it at first and just scanned the QR code to transfer it. Upon hearing the prompt, the owner of the rice shop became excited. "Boss, please leave your contact information and the address you want to deliver to. I will contact you when it arrives." Wen Lichu was very satisfied with the hospitable expression on the face of the rice shop owner. Seeing a pen and paper on the table, he picked it up and brushed down the address and phone number, saying, "Okay, you can deliver it to this address then." The owner of the rice shop smiled and said, "Okay, boss. When the goods arrive, I will contact you." Wen Lichu nodded and left the rice shop before going to the cloth shop. I haven't had such a large order volume even after running several stores. At the beginning, Wen Li ordered several stores, and together they were almost there. They also paid a deposit and left their phone address before going to another store. When she came out of the oil shop, Wen Lichu crossed out the items she had already bought on the list with a ballpoint pen. After taking a glance at the time, it was already past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I have already ordered the staple food, oily fabric, and some miscellaneous items. You can come back later or tomorrow to see other things. After being busy for so long, her stomach had already protested. Nothing is more important than filling one's stomach. Thinking about it this way, Wen Lichu put the order on his hand into his bag and left the wholesale market. The system has not spoken again since it came out. Just quietly watching Wen Lichu do all of this. Wen Lichu returned to the city center all the way, found a restaurant she often went to, ordered food, took out her tablet, and glanced at the emails and messages inside. After I leave, will there be no more traces of me in this world? The system looked at Wen Lichu somewhat unexpectedly. How could the host think so? Wen Lichu lowered his head and pulled at the vegetable salad in the bowl, saying lightly, "I'm just guessing." There is a hint of subtle melancholy and reluctance in the initial words of the system's Wen Li. The host can rest assured that I will arrange everything for the host, and the traces of your existence will not be cleared. Wen Lichu was not very happy when he heard the system's words, nor did he have any emotional fluctuations. Really, it seems like I overthought it. What else does the system want to say? The server has already walked over with the dishes ordered by Wen Li. I didn't speak again. Although Wen Lichu didn't say it, he could still feel her longing for this world. But she doesn't belong to this world. The system did not tell Wen Lichu this, but instead, she waited quietly for her to finish her meal before the system spoke up. Is the host going back next or? Wen Lichu shook his head slightly and glanced at the tablet he had set aside. He said in a low voice, "Go take a look and buy something else." The system didn't speak anymore. After sitting for a while, Wen Lichu got up to pay the bill and left the restaurant with his things in hand. This is not far from the largest shopping mall in this city, so she doesn't need to drive. The system watched as Wen Lichu walked towards the mall, feeling a slight sigh of relief. He is probably the first system that wishes to bind its own host and buy more things it likes. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Bye 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 bye. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Bye 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 bye. Wen Lichu spent over 3 hours browsing the entire mall and buying a lot of things. If you can't take it, spend some money to have it delivered to your home. After buying everything, Wen Lichu casually asked, "If I spend money like this, won't you stop me?" The system immediately replied, "This money is meant for the host. The host can buy whatever they like." Wen Lichu tugged at the corner of his mouth and didn't say anything more. After taking out the card and buying the order, I left my address and phone number and asked them to help deliver it to my home before leaving. By the time she left the mall, the sky was already a bit dark. The nightlife in this city has also entered the countdown. Wen Lichu stood on the square, watching cars and people coming and going. The hint of melancholy in my heart is even more evident. The system looked at Wen Lichu with some concern. Host. Wen Li regained her senses at first, restrained her emotions in her eyes, and said softly, "I'm fine." The system fell silent upon hearing her tone and attitude, and did not speak again. Wen Lichu turned around and walked towards the direction of her parking. Arriving at the entrance of the restaurant, I glanced and turned around to get in the car before heading away. Not long after returning home, all the things she bought in the mall were delivered. Wen Lichu opened the door and asked them to move the things in. After they finished moving and left, they closed the door. Turning around and looking at the things lying on the floor of the entire living room, he sat down on the ground and began to dismantle them. After dismantling them all, Wen Lichu glanced around and the little discomfort in his heart disappeared completely. After receiving the space, Wen Lichu returned to the bedroom and took out the clothes to change before going to the bathroom. At this point, the system spoke up and said, "Dinner has been booked for the host and is expected to be delivered in an hour and a half." Wen Lichu nodded and said, "Okay, thank you. System. You're welcome." I didn't speak again afterwards. Wen Lichu took a beautiful bath and followed the TV drama for a while. When she finishes her work and comes out of the bathroom, it's almost time. When dinner was delivered, it was her favorite farmhouse dish. Wen Lichu spoke up and said, "You really have a different system from the books I read. The system is a bit shy, but its tone is very calm. This is what the system should do." Wen Lichu raised her eyebrows lightly and didn't speak anymore. She finished dinner quietly, then picked up the garbage and took it downstairs to dispose of it. After that, she returned home to deal with her current affairs and lay down under the bed to rest. The next morning, Wen Lichu hastily left after planning what to do for today. Wen Lichu went to a Chinese restaurant. All the way in, we arrived at the reserved private room where two young men and women sat. The girls saw Wen Lichu stand up and smile. "Chu, you're here." Wen Lichu looked apologetically at the two of them, walked in and shook hands one by one, saying, "Sorry, there was a traffic jam on the road." "When did you arrive?" The girl said, "Liu Cheng and I have just arrived." After the three of them greeted each other, Liu Cheng sat down and went straight to the topic. "Lichu, you said last night that you had something to do with us today. What was the reason for that?" The girl's name is Ji Yan, and the two of them are very warm. They are high school classmates and their university is in the same city, but they are from different departments. The three of them had a good relationship, and after graduation, they were busy with their respective jobs, but never cut off contact. So this time when Lichu talked to them about something, and without saying a word, the two of them put down their work and came over. "Yeah, Chu, did something happen to you?" Wen Lichu didn't beat around the bush with them and said directly, "I remember you know some people who raise aquatic products and fruits, right?" Ji Yan looked at Wen Lichu with some confusion and said, "Yes, both the Lichu family and I do that." "What's wrong? Do you need it?" Wen Lichu didn't hide anything and nodded, Before they could ask, Wen Lichu explained, "I have a friend who needs a large quantity and time is tight, so I can only trouble you." Liu Cheng thought it was something, but it turned out to be this. "It's okay, you said how much you want, and we'll get in touch with you." Wen Lichu fell silent for a moment and then looked at the two of them and said, "Where are you? Give me as much as you have." Liu Cheng and Ji Yan were both stunned. Wen Lichu quickly guessed their reactions and said before they spoke, "He can eat it." Although the two of them were somewhat skeptical, they still knew Wen Lichu well. "She has said so," indicating that she is really in a hurry. "Okay." Wen Lichu glanced at time and said apologetically, "I have other things to attend to. I'm sorry, I have to leave first." Both Liu Cheng and Ji Yan can understand, so they won't mind. "It's okay, we also happen to be going back to work, let's go together." The three of them left the restaurant and separated. Wen Lichu drove to yesterday's wholesale market and settled everything else. "I went to the breakfast shop she used to eat frequently and talked to the boss about a business deal. It's already afternoon after finishing, and in the following time, Wen Lichu drove almost the entire city and suburbs. I bought everything I should have bought and everything I need to keep as a backup. Next, there are only medicines left." Wen Lichu asked the system to help with several virtual phones and then placed many orders for medication. First, Meituan, and then I went to the pharmacies that could be found in the city by myself. By the time we finish these, it's already been 6 days. Tomorrow is the last day, and she is leaving. Looking at the facilities inside and the night view outside. Wen Lichu lies on the bed and looks out of the French window. I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know how long it has been, but she doesn't even know when she fell asleep. When I wake up, I am awakened by the heat. Wen Li lifted his hand in a daze and wanted to find the air conditioning remote control on the bedside table. But he raised his hand and felt empty. Wen Li was startled and instinctively opened her eyes. What shone in her eyes was the wooden roof. She was dumbfounded and turned her head stiffly to look at the surroundings. Brick walls, wooden windows, and a layer of torn paper. Worn tables and cabinets. At this moment, Wen Lichu only had one thought in his mind, and he spoke up like this. Did I wear it in advance? At this point, the system appeared. Yes, host, welcome to the 1970s. Wen Li's first day of the Lunar New Year was completely cracked open. Is it so sudden? Isn't it still time? System. Time has passed. Wen Lichu looked down at his hands and the clothes he was wearing. The hands, which were as thin as skin and bones, were covered in dirt, and the clothes, which were covered in dust, were also covered in dirt. Some cannot be accepted, she has a cleanliness fetish. However, she dare not act rashly until she has a clear understanding of the situation. How big is this body? The system says. Just turned 16. Wen Lichu frowned and looked at her paws. Is a 16-year-old girl so thin? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Dressing up as an auntie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Dressing up as an auntie. The system reminds us. In this era, we can't eat enough or wear warm clothes. Wen Lichu only realized that she is no longer in modern times. Just as she was about to ask the system about her identity in this world. A sharp pain pierced her mind, and the sudden pain almost fainted for her. The system sensed Wen Lichu's reaction and said, the host is holding back, this is the memory of this body being transmitted. Wen Lichu remained silent and gritted her lips tightly. 1 hour later. Wen Lichu's whole body seemed to have just been pulled out of the water, soaking wet. The system took a towel from the space and placed it next to Wen Lichu. Wen Li closed her eyes and sorted out the memories in her mind bit by bit. Same name and surname, but different destiny. The original owner of this body, also known as Wen Lichu, was 16 years old and had no father or mother. The only grandfather who relied on her passed away 3 years ago. She is the only one left at home. Her grandfather has a very high seniority in the village, to the extent that she also has a high seniority in the village. The villagers, regardless of whether adults or children see her, have to call her Auntie. At this point, Wen Lichu was somewhat surprised. Is her seniority so high? The system suddenly says. Host, she is you, you are her. Wen Lichu's eyebrows furrowed subconsciously, with a puzzled expression in his eyes. What does that mean? Asking while pondering all possibilities. It can't be that she belongs to this world right away. As soon as this idea came to mind, the system immediately spoke up. The host guessed correctly. Wen Lichu froze completely. After a long time without any reaction, he pointed to himself and said, how could that happen, me? I belong to this world right now. System answer. Yes, we will inform the host of the details in the future. Wen Li initially felt absurd. I didn't wait for her to come to her senses from this thought-provoking news. I heard footsteps coming from outside. The system will retrieve the towel just prepared for Wen Li in the next second. Wen Lichu looked up at the door of the room. A person with a basket and one hand pushing open the door walked in wearing a wide gray cloth. Wearing grass shoes woven from grass. Wen Lichu looked from bottom to top and was a little girl about 16 or 17 years old, with 2 braids. The little girl looked at her with joy in her eyes and approached, asking, "Auntie, have you woken up? Are you feeling better? Are you still dizzy?" Wen Lichu instinctively shook her head and said, "I'm not dizzy." The little girl put down the things and raised her hand to place it on Wen Lichu's forehead, feeling that the temperature on her forehead had already dropped slightly. Walking to the end of the Kong, he took a small table from the box and placed it in front of Wen Lichu. Then, while speaking, he took out the food from the basket and placed it on the table. "My mother said you have heatstroke. The village doctor came over just now and said that you will be fine once you wake up. You should rest well at home these 2 days and can't go to work anymore." After Wen Lichu finished speaking, she retrieved her information from her mind. Chunya is the youngest daughter of the village captain, with 2 older brothers and sisters above her. She is the youngest and also the most favorite in the family. She is about the same age as her current body, and her original temperament is relatively soft. Many times, she is not very good at rejecting people, and it is Chunya who protects her and blocks in front of her. Their whole family is like this, especially good for their original body. Wen Lichu looked at Chunya with a slightly more gentle expression in his eyes. Learning from his memory of how Wen Lichu talked and communicated with her, he replied, "Okay." After hearing Wen Lichu's answer, Chunya muttered again, "This is what my mother asked me to bring to you. You didn't eat in the morning, which is why you got heatstroke. My mother said, you don't have to worry about not eating in the future. If you don't eat and work, your body will get sick." All of her words were patiently listened to by Wen Lichu, nodding obediently from time to time. This scene blinds the system, creating a scene of an old mother muttering. Chunya basically said her mother's words before realizing it. She slammed her forehead and said, "Oh, my aunt, I've been talking to you all this time and forgot to ask you to eat first." Wen Li spoke in a warm voice and said, "It's okay." Chunya said solemnly, "That's not possible. You haven't eaten for so long, and you've been suffering from heatstroke. You must eat first." Speaking, he placed a bowl of sweet potato and brown rice in front of Wen Lichu and pushed 2 dishes in front of her. Wen Li looked at the food on the table at first, then at Chunya. Reached out and picked it up, then ate it in small bites. "It's not very delicious, but it's not bad either." Chunya looked at Wen Lichu obediently and skillfully eating, feeling very satisfied. Wen Lichu was very uncomfortable being stared at by Chunya while eating, especially when she looked at her with her aunt's smile on her face, which was outrageous, but unfortunately she couldn't break her character. So, lunch came to an end in this eerie and long atmosphere. After finishing the isothermal pair, Chunya packed up the things, put them in the basket, and then moved the table away before leaving. It was only after confirming that Chunya had left that Wen Lichu breathed a sigh of relief. The whole person collapsed on the bed. At the same time, the sound of the system echoed in Wen Lichu's mind. "The host space has prepared warm water, is the host washing up now?" Without even thinking about it, Wen Li spoke up and said, "Yes, it must be." Speaking, the whole person disappeared on the Kong. The system has locked the outside door and also the room door. After Wen Li first entered the space, she walked to the bathroom prepared by the system, took off her clothes, and began to wash up. 10 minutes later, Wen Lichu looked at the water in the bathtub. The turbidity made her instinctively shiver. Immediately shout to the system is preparing a bucket of water. The system moved the bucket out and was stunned when it saw the water inside. However, he reacted quickly and calmly said, "Host, wait a moment." Wen Lichu stood in the bathroom wearing a towel, feeling a bit numb. The first time she saw someone who could wash out such dirty water. At the same time, I felt a little more heartache for this little girl in my heart. I have gained some understanding of the poverty in this world. Not long after, a bucket of clean water appeared by Wen Lichu's side. Wen Lichu stayed in the bathroom for another 20 minutes before coming out. After taking a shower, Wen Lichu turned white all over. The appearance of this body is somewhat similar to that of Wen Lichu in modern times. However, at that time, Wen Li was more mature and aggressive. And now, Wen Lichu has lost that aggressiveness and added a touch of gentleness. This temperament is innate to her. Wen Lichu walked up to her shelf of various skincare and hair care equipment. Selected a few things. First, get her hair done, then the skin on her body, and then the face. After she finished these things, she lay in bed and took a nap. When I woke up, it was already dark outside. At the system's reminder, Wen Lichu changed into a new outfit and left the room. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Not a Granddaughter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Not a granddaughter. During the day in the room, she was sweating profusely, and at this moment, there was still a sour smell of sweat lingering on the Kong. Wen Lichu frowned and tidied up everything on the Kong, placing it aside. Then opened the windows and doors to allow air circulation. At this moment, when Chunya came in from outside carrying a basket. Looking at the lack of light in the room, he asked, "Auntie, are you awake?" Wen Lichu originally planned to carry everything outside, but now he heard Wen Chunya's voice and could only put down the things first. As he walked out, he replied, "I'm awake." Wen Chunya walked over with a smile and said, "I'm here to bring you dinner." Wen Li initially wanted to say that she wasn't hungry, but when she saw the smile on the little girl's face, she circled it in her mouth and swallowed it back. "Okay, thank you." Wen Chunya waved her hand and said, "What's the trouble here? You're not feeling well. It's normal for us to take care of you." Wen Li tugged at the corners of her mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. "You have a meal first," urged Wen Chunya as she spoke without isothermal pair. As she spoke, she took Wen Lichu's hand and walked towards the room. The room was very dark, but Wen Chunya didn't feel it at all. In addition, except for the Kong in the room, there is a table next to it, and everything else is on the Kong, so there is no need to worry about tripping over it. When walking to the edge of the Kong, Wen Lichu slightly moved his hand and pulled it away from Wen Chunya's hand. "Walk over to the table, take the matches from the table, and light the candles stuck on the table." The originally dim room suddenly lit up quite a bit. Wen Chunya placed the basket on the table and took out 3 bowls from inside, just like noon. After arranging it, he said to Wen Lichu, "Auntie, let's eat first." Wen Li glanced at the food on the table and nodded. Then walked to the edge of the Kong and sit down, picking up chopsticks to eat in small bites. Wen Chunya still looked at her eating with a smile, just like noon. Wen Lichu felt uneasy all over when she saw her, and after swallowing the food in her mouth, she said, "Well, would you like to have some?" Wen Chunya waved her hand and said, "I'm full at home. This is for you, you can eat it." Wen Lichu had nothing to say, so he had to grit his teeth and continue eating. Wen Chunya had just finished eating the rice in Wen Li's mouth when she suddenly stood up and looked at her with a surprised expression. "Ah, Grandma, what's wrong with you?" Wen Lichu's hands trembled at first sight when she was startled. She almost choked on a mouthful of food, and looked up at her with a confused expression, "What's wrong?" Wen Chunya's face changed drastically and she said, "Your hands, and your face." Wen Lichu thought something was wrong and quickly put down the bowls and chopsticks in his hand, looking down carefully. Looking left and right, "I didn't notice anything." "It's okay." Wen Chunya said seriously, "It's white." Wen Lichu froze completely and mechanically slowly looked up at her, "Is that why?" Wen Chunya nodded and said, Wen Li's mouth twitched uncontrollably at the corner of her mouth. With a hint of helplessness in his tone, he said, "After sleeping for a while today, I got up and took a shower, and rubbed the mud off my body." Wen Chunya looked at her hand with a hint of joy in her eyes. Unconsciously, with a few stages to ask, rubbing mud. Will it turn white after rubbing? Under her expectant gaze, Wen Lichu spoke up, it will be whiter. If you want it to be white, you need to avoid not letting the sun shine or exposing it too harshly. When Chunya propped her chin with both hands and looked at Wen Lichu with starry eyes, saying, Auntie, how clever you are. Wen Li was confused for a moment and said, She didn't say anything. Why did she look at herself with a look of admiration on her face? When Chunya thought to herself that she must rub it when she goes back. She works on the ground every day, not necessarily because she has been tanned, but because she has been blackened by mud. I'll go back and rub myself a little later. While Wen Chunya was currently lost in her thoughts, Wen Lichu quickly resolved the food in her bowl. When the last bite of food was taken, Wen Lichu breathed a sigh of relief and tidied up the dishes, saying, I've eaten it. When Chunya regained her senses and stood up, saying, Then I'll go back. Tomorrow. Before she could finish speaking, Wen Lichu immediately took over and said, I'll just make my own food tomorrow, don't bother you. When Chunya was stunned for a moment, wanting to say that it wasn't really troublesome at all, but suddenly something came to her mind and she swallowed her words. Okay, then I'll go back first. Wen Lichu stood up and walked over, I'll take you out. After speaking, no matter what reaction Wen Chunya had, she walked out. When Chunya opened her mouth and wanted to say no more, it wasn't far away, but before she could say anything, Wen Lichu had already walked out. Helpless but to keep up. Upon reaching the door, Wen Chunya stopped Wen Lichu and said, It's not far, I can go back by myself. Wen Lichu looked at her and saw her persistence on her face, so she stopped walking. Hurry up and go back. It's getting darker later and it's not easy to leave. Wen Chunya nodded and walked towards home. Wen Lichu watched as Wen Chunya walked away before turning back. Returning to the room all the way, he took out a fully charged small desk lamp and turned it on, then placed it on the table and blew out the candle beside him. Wen Lichu looked at the things placed at the end of the Kong and felt that one head was too big. However, I still accepted my fate and put everything in the space, threw it into the washing machine, and used odorless laundry detergent to wash all these things clean. After cleaning the Kong, Wen Lichu hesitated over and over again but still didn't take out the things in the space. After putting away the desk lamp, I also entered the space. I cleaned up myself briefly, then lay in bed and continued to sort out the memories in my mind. Originally from the village, there were quite a large number of generations, but this village not only had their Wen surname, but also had Chen and Wang surnames. She is an aunt of the Wen family, but not of the Chen and Wang families. In addition, her original nature is soft, and people of one clan dare not bully her, but people of other surnames will bully her. But these are all in the dark, they are definitely not daring on the surface. After all, the captain of their production team is surnamed Wen. Wen Lichu's appearance is among the best in the village. Many girls her age are jealous of her appearance. There are new educated youth in the village, and several male educated youth have shown their hospitality to their original bodies. Some are attracted to her original identity, and another is that the captain's family takes extra care of her. If we could really get along with her, we wouldn't be able to act recklessly in this village in the future, but it would be more free than being an educated youth. Another thing is that they are attracted to their original appearance and have a soft personality. But none of them succeeded. There is one more thing that the whole Peach Blossom village doesn't know. Wen Lichu is not her grandfather's granddaughter. But it was brought back by his grandfather from outside. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Rebirth, one of the female lead, Wen Chunya. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Rebirth, one of the female lead, Wen Chunya. At that time, his grandfather went to visit his son and soon returned with the ashes of Wen Lichu and his son's daughter. Law. It was at that time that everyone thought Wen Lichu was her grandfather's granddaughter. Her grandfather has always treated her as his own granddaughter, and no one knows about this except her grandfather and her. Grandpa only told the original owner about this matter before leaving, and also reminded her to keep it in her stomach. No one could say it, otherwise there would be danger. This is one of them. If other people in the village know that she is not his granddaughter and has no connection to the Wen family, then they won't take extra care of anything in the future, no matter what happens. The original owner never thought that he was not my grandfather's granddaughter. When she heard this news, she was confused and even didn't believe it. She didn't believe she wasn't her grandfather's granddaughter. But the fact is, she really isn't. Without giving her any chance to catch her breath, her grandfather left that night and she took care of his affairs with the help of the villagers. After his grandfather was buried, Wen Lichu spent several months in a daze. His originally quiet temperament became even more dull after his grandfather's death, and he couldn't even utter a word a day. She listens to her grandfather very much, and she hasn't said a word about her background. Wen Lichu suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do you know the identity of the original owner in the system?" The system enlarged the 4 large characters on the screen and showed them to Wen Lichu, saying, "Insufficient permissions." After a brief glance, Wen Li withdrew her gaze and asked her inner question, "Am I in a fictional world?" The system was not surprised at all that Wen Lichu could guess what kind of world this world was, but rather seemed to have anticipated it long ago. The host guessed correctly, this is indeed an fictional world of novels. Wen Li raised her eyebrows at first. Actually, she had already made some guesses in her heart before wearing it, but she forgot because she was busy hoarding goods at that time. Who are the male and female protagonists in this book? System. The male and female leads are a pair of educated youth, both of whom have not yet arrived. In this world of novels, there are 2 female leads, but in the end, only one comes together with the male lead. Wen Lichu looked at the system with some surprise and said, 2 female leads. The system nodded. This is a novel about the rebirth of a female protagonist. The original male and female protagonists were childhood sweethearts, but after the female protagonist passed away early, the male protagonist came together with the company and comfort of another female protagonist. The female protagonist, who had passed away early, has been reborn. When Lichu immediately understood that, to put it simply, the male lead's ex-partner passed away early, and when the male lead was feeling sad and upset, another female lead walked out with him. But now the female lead who died early is actually a supporting actress, reborn, and has become 2 female leads. When Lichu asked, the original male and female lead were educated youth, but who is the other female lead? What setting am I in this book? Finally, don't forget to ask yourself for your identity. The system hesitated for a moment and said, the other female lead is Chunya. Wen Li paused for the first time and looked at the system with some disbelief. Captain's daughter. System. The original plot was that after the first female lead died, the male lead couldn't leave for a long time. By chance, when Chunya saw the male lead crying and felt sorry for him, she walked over to chat with him, and the 2 of them chatted and chatted. The system didn't finish speaking the rest, and Wen Lichu also understood. After a moment of silence, Wen Lichu asked, the ending must be very good. System. Wen Lichu pinched her temples and sorted out the plot, saying, so now we're in the second plot, right? That means the first female lead is reborn, and she definitely won't let go of the male lead. System. Yes. Wen Lichu bit her lip and the reborn female lead. Wen Chunya definitely couldn't argue with her, and they were childhood sweethearts. So this plot cannot be executed. Who is the second male? The system says. From the village, when I see it, I will inform the host. Wen Lichu nodded and said, what is my identity in the book? At a glance, the system said awkwardly. The host, you were a minor supporting role in the early stage, but in the later stage, the system was not clear, and the permissions were insufficient. When Wen Lichu heard that he was a minor supporting role, he slightly took a puff at the corner of his mouth and said helplessly, "It seems that it has something to do with my life experience." The system also thought of it. It seems so. At this moment, Wen Lichu was thinking that since Wen Chunya couldn't be with the male lead, the second male lead would also be a good choice. After all, the second male lead is very passionate, and the second male lead is not inferior to the male lead. After all, if the male lead doesn't have a halo, he may not be able to compete with the second male lead. Since the second male is from the village, he can also be considered a childhood sweetheart who grew up together. In addition, as the two companies are close, they will also have a relatively better understanding. The system immediately guessed the meaning of Wen Lichu. Is the host planning to match Wen Chunya and the second male? Wen Lichu raised his eyebrows and looked at the system, saying, besides having no halo, the second male lead is not inferior to the male lead. The system glanced at the later plot and said, there is still a certain gap in identity, but it can almost be on par with the male host later on. Wen Li's first serious analysis of the system. That's it. Since it's not bad, she has a strong affection for the female lead, is ambitious, and has the ability to deserve Wen Chunya. Besides, Wen Chunya is also the female lead, so it's definitely not bad. If the two of them work hard together, it's impossible to fail them. Besides, isn't she still here? The male lead is probably a good person, but now there is a rebirth and they are childhood sweethearts. I want Wen Chunya and the male lead to be together. Not to mention anything else, with the male protagonist's feelings towards the female protagonist, if it weren't for her death, there wouldn't have been anything between Wen Chunya and the male protagonist. The first plot is that the male lead's childhood sweetheart died, and only then did Wen Chunya sit in the female lead's position. The current plot is that if the male lead's childhood sweetheart is reborn, he will not die again, and the female lead Wen Chunya cannot sit up. So since that's the case, why bother stubbornly knocking, right? Why don't we try another one? Besides, isn't the second male good? Isn't the second male not good? When she reads, compared to the male lead, she prefers the male lead and loves him the most. Love without restraint, despite being so kind and devoted, always prioritize the female lead in everything. Not worse than the male lead, he needs a halo, and the male lead may not be as good as him. The system fell silent after listening to Wen Lichu's words. He thinks what Wen Lichu said is right. The second male lead is indeed very good, and the gap between him and the male lead is just a halo. Wen Lichu lowered his eyes and said calmly, but the premise of all this is that the male lead's childhood sweetheart should not attack Wen Chunya, otherwise. End of this chapter. Chapter 7 Wen Lichu. The system in your impression is very different from mine. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Wen Lichu. The system in my impression is very different from yours. The system was a bit stunned, the host cares so much about Wen Chunya. Didn't they just meet today? Host. Wen Lichu looked up at him and said, there should be a record in the book that the captain and Wen Chunya were very good to the original owner. They were very good. They can be said to be their own daughters and sisters. The system was stunned and understood. Wen Lichu first saw the memories of this body, many of which were about them taking care of her, being good to her, and maintaining her memories. Her eyes were gentle as she spoke, pointing to her own head. And didn't you say, she's me, I'm her? I remember their kindness to me here. The system fell silent, but the host remained unchanged. As always, she protected the calf and remembered who was good to her. After reading the book, the system awakened the memories of the previous life, and was not surprised by Wen Lichu's words and some of her habits. Wen Li stopped talking when he first saw the system. He changed the topic and asked, but I'm still curious. As a small supporting role, why can I wear it? The virtual panel of the system is filled with 4 words floating on the screen. Insufficient permissions. After Wen Li first looked at it, she drew a black line and said, dot. He said angrily, so what permissions do you have? The system seemed to be unable to understand the meaning behind Wen Li's initial words, and answered solemnly. Provide assistance, survey, monitoring to the host. Wen Li's face darkened as she listened more at first. I raised my hand and made a pause, saying, stop, that means besides these, there's nothing else I can do to help, and I can't provide any help, right? The system showed a serious expression of shaking its head. Can provide help, as long as the host encounters an unsolvable problem, the system can help the host solve it. Wen Lichu looked at him with a look of disbelief on his face and said, is that so? System. Helplessly say. The system will not deceive the host. Wen Lichu sighed and pretended to be distressed, saying, I have encountered it now. The entire system was a bit numb. He knew what Wen Lichu wanted and shouted with a hint of grievance, host. Wen Lichu noticed the grievances in his tone and his mouth twitched. Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Find me something to supplement my nutrition, Du said with a hint of unhappiness. The system breathed a sigh of relief and immediately responded. Okay, host. As soon as Wen Lichu sat on the bed, the system immediately arranged a table in front of him. After arranging, the system suddenly asked, do the host want to lean against the bed to eat or sit by the bed? Wen Lichu raised his eyebrows and looked at the system, how do you eat leaning on the bed? As soon as I finished speaking, I saw a lazy person's computer desk moving across the bed. And it looks particularly familiar. The more I look, the more familiar I feel. As I get closer, isn't this the one in her room? Isn't this mine? When did you receive it? To be honest, the system received everything from the host before they arrived as she spoke, illuminating another corner of the space. Wen Li looked over and saw that it was her modern room. Wen Lichu was shocked as she looked at the system, her eyes slightly rosy. Then he stumbled over a bit, trembling with a slightly hoarse voice as he asked, has everything been moved over? The system replied positively. Yes. Wen Lichu walked in and looked at the sofa, restaurant, kitchen, bathroom, and finally the room. Everything inside remained the same as before she came here. At this moment, Wen Li suddenly felt a sense of belonging. Thank you. The system looked at Wen Lichu's appearance and felt a bit heartbroken, but there was nothing that could be done. This was the fate of the host. This is what the system should do, and there is one thing I believe the host will be happier after watching it. Wen Li was about to ask what it was when she heard a familiar voice in her car. I stood there dumbfounded, watching the sound of the headlights and starting the car outside the window. You. The system saw that Wen Lichu was already shocked and speechless, and was very satisfied with the surprise she had given her. Throwing another bomb, he said. Oil, the system has also prepared it for the host, so the host can safely drive it in the future. After listening to the system's words, Wen Lichu's whole heart was violently shaken. At this moment, his head suddenly became clear, and he looked up at him with an emotion that the system couldn't see clearly. He calmly asked, why are you treating me so well? The system hesitated for a moment, then pretended to be puzzled and said, the system and the host are integrated. The system is good for the host, isn't it normal? Wen Lichu looked at him silently, as if weighing the credibility of what he said. The system looked at Wen Lichu as if it had guessed what she was thinking, and spoke up. Since the system is bound to the host, it is integrated. The system will never do anything to harm the host, so naturally it will not calculate the host. Wen Li was initially told by the system what she was thinking and did not feel embarrassed. Although these words seemed like a pie painting, Wen Lichu could feel that the system's words were not deceiving her. I don't know why, although it was just a feeling, Wen Lichu felt that he really didn't know. This feeling is very strange. Wen Lichu couldn't understand why she had this feeling, but she couldn't figure it out. Looking up at the system seriously, he said, you are very different from the system in my impression. The system was stunned, then showed a shy expression. Oh, Asterisk forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash asterisk, Q. This can be considered as the first time the host has praised him when he returns to his side. After many years, I still feel a little shy. The space is very large, and in the previous world, all the host's hoarding was still preserved. However, these things cannot be made known to the host yet. Let her know later when there is a chance. Wen Lichu took a shower and changed into a new outfit before lying back on her bed, with a satisfied and nostalgic expression on her face. The system has arranged everything that Wen Lichu just said for her to put on the table. Wen Li initially said thank you, and then began to take small bites to supplement the body with nutrients. As soon as she thinks of her things and her possessions, her appetite opens up. However, she restrained herself and put down her chopsticks and spoon after eating half full. The system thoughtfully tidied up everything for her. Wen Li got up and walked around the space for a while, dissipating food. 10 minutes later, Wen Lichu lay back in bed and soon fell asleep. Early the next morning. When Wen Li first woke up, it was still dark outside, and her body's biological clock was causing trouble. Even when she woke up, she couldn't sleep anymore. Wen Lichu threw the things she had packed last night into the washing machine. Then take out a bed sheet with a color similar to the one she washed and cover it with a soft mattress. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Eggs, Chen Ermei. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Eggs, Chen Ermei. Take it outside, wait for the bedding to be washed clean, wait for dawn, and take advantage of this moment. Wen Lichu roughly tidied up the hygiene of the room. The paper pasted on the window has already broken many holes, but there is currently nothing to replace, so we can only leave it for now. As dawn approached, the hygiene of the room was basically done. Wen Li took a shower when she first returned to the space, washed her face and brushed her teeth, and then ate something. Just take the things out and hang them in the yard. Looking at the water in the tank, it's almost bottoming out. Put some water in the tank later. Thinking about entering the kitchen and looking at the simple kitchen, with one stove and one cabinet, and 2 bundles of firewood placed next to the stove. Looking at these conditions, Wen Lichu was very grateful that she could cook on the stove. After looking at the kitchen, Wen Lichu walked into the yard and looked at this home that belonged to her in this world. A small courtyard with 2 rooms, one of which belongs to her deceased grandfather. Another one is hers, a kitchen with a thatched hut set up next to it, specifically for storing firewood. There is no well at home, so if you want to fetch water, you have to go to the east end of the village. Her family lives at the west end of the village, and this time she travels half the way through the village. There is also a rudimentary bathroom built specifically for bathing at the corner of the yard. As the sky was about to break, Wen Lichu heard the voices of the neighbors and pedestrians passing by their doorstep. They went to work early in the morning. This time belongs to mid-June, which is the hot weather. Go early and come back at noon when the sun is at its most scorching. Then take a few hours off, start work at around 2 p.m., and come back in the evening when it's getting dark. Wen Lichu was thinking about whether to take care of this body before going to work. This idea was immediately rejected by Wen Lichu. If she didn't go to work, she would receive very little food this year. Although her space is not lacking in food, she is afraid that it may arouse suspicion from others. So should we show off or show off? Although she doesn't have to cook at all and eats a lot in the space, let's forget it. Not firing for a long time will definitely arouse suspicion and add unnecessary trouble. After thinking it over, let's take a few days off for now. Then in a few days, go fill the water tank with water and go to the mountain to find a few bundles of firewood. Make up for all the things that are missing at home. Thinking of this, Wen Li first thought of the old clothes of the original owner in the space. I just feel a headache. That old clothes are already short, some are even almost patched up. Although it can cover the body, a girl's clothes and pants are half short, which looks pitiful. Wen Lichu was rummaging through the money and bills of this world. After taking a look, it's not enough. The total amount of money at home is only about 10 yuan, and she doesn't have any tickets. She does have 2 sugar tickets. There are also some other industrial tickets. There isn't much to add up to. Wen Lichu pinched his eyebrows, returned to the room, closed the door, and entered the space. Ask the system to help find the sewing machine and find the necessary tools for making clothes, such as cloth and needles. After everything was ready, Wen Lichu walked to the room and found several books on designing and cutting clothes from the bookshelf. Serious and careful research. Before she could figure it out, the system reminded her that Chunya had arrived. Wen Li immediately left the room, and when she opened the door, she heard a knocking sound outside. Walking over and opening the door, Chunya held 2 eggs in her hand. "Auntie, this is what my father asked me to bring to you." Wen Li was taken aback for a moment and quickly waved his hand, saying, "This is too valuable, I can't take it." Chunya grabbed her hand and placed one of the eggs in her hand, saying, "My dad said you must hold it, or else you won't treat us like your younger generation." At this moment, a girl living next door to Wen Lichu's house, who was about the same age as them, kept her eyes fixed on the egg in Chunya's hand, swallowing saliva as she spoke. "Chunya, don't give it to me." Chunya looked over, and at the moment she saw someone, her expression immediately changed to disgust. "Chen Ermei, you're really shameless. You want to eat eggs and go home to find your mother." Chen Ermei's face instantly turned ugly when she was scolded by Chunya. "Chunya, aren't you just relying on being the captain's daughter? What's so remarkable about you? It's just eggs, and my family also has them." Chunya looked at Chen Ermei with a disdainful expression on her face, unable to speak clearly. It was a waste of words arguing with her. She looked at Wen Lichu and said, "Auntie, let's go in." Wen Lichu glanced at the girl named Chen Ermei and then withdrew her gaze lightly, "Come in." Turning aside to let Chunya in. Chen Ermei saw the 2 of them ignoring her directly, and her breath was stuck in her throat, unable to get in or out. Upon hearing the sound of the door closing, I spat in the direction of Wen Lichu's house. Chunya said with a hint of annoyance on her face, "Chen Ermei is like a crazy dog, always looking for a sense of presence." Wen Lichu poured her a bowl of water and said softly, "Just ignore her. She just talks and doesn't dare to do anything, as long as we don't pay attention to her." Chunya wanted to say something more, but seeing that Wen Lichu was not affected at all, the little annoyance in her heart was gradually calmed down. Just as he was about to persuade Wen Lichu to eat the eggs, he caught a glimpse of something hanging on the bamboo pole outside the yard. He looked at Wen Lichu with an incredulous expression and said, "Auntie, did you wash the clothes and bedding outside early in the morning?" Wen Lichu calmly smiled and said, "After resting all night, I feel much better. I thought about the things at home that haven't been washed for a long time, they all have a smell, so I washed them before the sun came out and it wasn't so hot." Chunya was a bit angry but more helpless. Her aunt didn't know how to cherish her body and said, "My dad is right, you can't stop." Wen Lichu felt a little guilty and touched his nose, saying, "I don't think so, it's just rare to have time." Chunya knew she couldn't say anything about her, so she decided not to say anything anymore. Wen Lichu suddenly said, "I won't go to work today. I guess the other people in the village should gossip again." Upon hearing Wen Lichu's words, Chunya's face changed and she said with disgust in her eyes, "You have fainted from heatstroke and are not feeling well enough to go to work." They are not unaware of this. We can just ignore a group of gossipy women. In a village with 3 surnames, it is inevitable that there will be ups and downs. Some people have a mouth that smells like eating something pungent, and their words also stink. Wen Li initially looked at Chunya, who was full of energy, and felt very cute. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Picking Firewood, Warm Spring Seedlings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Picking Firewood, warm spring seedlings for a moment, I couldn't help but reach out and pinch her swollen face with a smile, saying, I don't care, it's just that your dad might get talked about by them again because of me. As soon as when Chunya thought about every matter related to her aunt, they would hold on and bully her. There were no elders to support her in the family, but they forgot that even if there were no elders in the family, there was an entire Wen family behind her. My dad doesn't care, he dares to discuss behind our backs and in front of us. My mother will know this, and they won't be able to take off a layer of skin. Wen Chunya's mother and grandmother are well-known shrews in the village. To be precise, her grandmother is a shrew, and her mother is a cultured shrew. Generally speaking, no one wants to confront her mother, mainly because she can't speak up. As for her grandmother's words, they are unreasonable, but she excels in being more unreasonable. Almost no one in the village can argue with their mother.in.law and daughter.in.law. Speaking of this, Wen Lichu still feels a bit embarrassed. In recent years, half of the disputes between their family and the village have been due to her. Because they felt that the captain was biased towards her, the aunt of their Wen family, the others were unhappy. With this in mind, Wen Lichu let out a leisurely sigh and said, I just wronged your father. Wen Chunya waved her hand and said nonchalantly, Harm, what's wrong with this? We are biased towards you, but we don't use anything from the government to be biased. We use things from our own family, so what's the relationship with them? They just envy others. It's better to do more work and earn a few more points with this leisure time. Wen Lichu has always known in his memory that Wen Chunya's mouth is powerful, and when he sees it in person, he will be somewhat surprised. But what she said was also true, and it was all well-founded. You're right, he said with a smile when Chunya suddenly arrived and said, By the way, Auntie, didn't you say there's almost no firewood at home? I'll go to the mountains to find some for you later. How could Wen Lichu feel embarrassed to let a little girl go to the mountains to help her find firewood? I'll go with you. Wen Chunya knew that Wen Lichu was worried that it would be unsafe for her to go up the mountain alone. You're not feeling well yet, I'll just go by myself. You don't have to worry about me, she said when Lichu deliberately put on a serious expression and said, I'm much better now. If you don't let me go, you can't go either. Wen Chunya didn't forget what she was here for. She handed the egg to Wen Lichu and said seriously, I really can't do anything about you. Let's go together, but before we go, you must eat the egg, otherwise you can't go with me. Wen Lichu. This little girl is using the same trick she just did on herself. Helplessly looking at her, this little girl is really not easy to deceive. She has been talking for so long, yet she hasn't forgotten about this matter. Okay, listen to you. She reached out and took the egg from her hand, gently cracked the eggshell, and then peeled it off. Eating in small bites. Another egg, when Chunya put it back in her pocket and said, I'll keep it for you. You can eat it when you're tired on the mountain later. Wen Lichu was about to speak when he heard Wen Chunya continue, I know what you're talking about. I've eaten eggs before, and this is yours. Don't let me eat them, I won't eat them anyway. My mother cooks for me every day at home, so you don't have to worry about me not eating. After finishing speaking, he stood up and walked out, saying, I'm going home to get something. You wait for me at home. When the last word fell, the person had already walked out. Wen Lichu looked helplessly at the half-eaten egg in her hand. This girl, like her mother, doesn't leave any room for others when speaking. With a hint of mockery in the system tone, he said. The host complains verbally, but is happy in the heart. Wen Lichu did not refute, but smiled and said, this girl is likable. But for anyone who is good to the host, the system will include them in their follow list and generously praise them. Indeed. After finishing the remaining eggs, Wen Lichu said, these eggs are quite fragrant. After finishing, he added, more fragrant than eggs from later generations. The system is not speaking. When Wen Lichu packed up his things, Wen Chunya had already arrived. The two families were not far apart, and it only took a few minutes to come back and forth. "Auntie, have you packed up yet?" Wen Lichu put on her backpack and handed her a bamboo tube filled with water, saying, "All right, we can set off now." Regardless of whether Wen Lichu agreed or not, he made a decision for her and said, "I remember your house is running out of water, right? I'll tell my brother and his team later and ask them to help take 2 trips to fill it up." She knows Wen Lichu too well. If you ask her to agree to do it again at this time, it's enough. She will think it's too troublesome for others and will talk to you for a while. Usually, when encountering such things, when Chunya talks to herself and won't let Wen Lichu get in the way. Even if she said it later, Wen Chunya would choose to ignore it. After a brief understanding of Wen Chunya just now, Wen Lichu no longer wants to pull. Without saying anything, he nodded quietly on the side. Seeing Wen Lichu not speaking, Wen Chunya was somewhat surprised, but she also breathed a sigh of relief. After all, if she keeps pushing around, she will really have a headache. My aunt is just too far-sighted. They are a family, and it is normal for them to help out on a regular basis. In addition, she is the only one in her family, so it is only natural for them to help more. This is the first time the system has seen a host being unable to speak. I have a slight liking for this warm spring sprout. She is better than the captain's daughter from the previous world in terms of accommodation. After locking the door, Wen Chunya and Wen Lichu walked all the way to the place where everyone in House Han village often picked up firewood. On the road, sometimes I come across children from the village either carrying pigweed in their baskets or carrying their younger siblings. When adults go to work, some families have very young children, and they will leave it to the older children to take care of. As we approached the foot of the mountain, we met a young girl who was several years younger than them. After a simple greeting, we met. The little girl looked at Wen Lichu's concern and asked, "Auntie, are you okay?" Wen Lichu smiled gently and shook his head, "I'm fine, I'm already much better." The little girl saw that Wen Lichu's face was not as pale as it looked yesterday, and felt relieved. She said, "That's good, then I'll go back first." Wen Lichu nodded and said, "Let's go." Wen Chunya looked at the little girl walking away and said, "Chunya, carrying such a big basket, probably helped her sister cut the pigsty again." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. A personality similar to you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. A personality similar to you. Wen Lichu looked at her with some confusion and said, "Does she often help her sister cut pigweed?" Wen Chunya shook her head and said with a hint of dissatisfaction on her face, "Help. Auntie, you're too kind." She was forced. Wen Lichu didn't understand, how could it be forced? Wen Chunya knows that Wen Lichu doesn't pay much attention to other people's affairs, and she has always been kind and won't think ill of others. So for her doubts, Wen Chunya was not surprised at all, but rather very calm. Her cousin threatened her, Chen Miaoer. Her father only had her daughter, and because they didn't have a son, their family couldn't hold their heads high among their large family. Chen Miaoer had been bullied by her cousin all along. Most of the time, when I see her doing work, it's basically her milk or what other people in the family call her. For example, in her big basket just now, it contains the amount of pig grass that 2 people need to cut. Wen Lichu didn't expect such a release in recent years. Just as Wen Li was frowning and thinking about something, Wen Chunya suddenly said, "Chunya has a personality similar to yours. She's too soft and easily bullied." Wen Lichu. That was Wen Lichu from the past, not her. But she cannot say that although Wen Lichu was also her before, she does not admit it at this moment. After all, her true temperament is not soft. Seeing Wen Lichu not speaking, Wen Chunya thought she was angry and burst out laughing. "I'm joking with you, don't get angry." Wen Lichu didn't look angry after hearing her words, but instead agreed with her words and said seriously, "I'm not angry, you're right. I have a soft temper, and every time you protect me, I will gradually change and never be bullied again. Wen Chunya was stunned, as if she had never expected Wen Lichu to say such a thing. She thought Wen Lichu had misunderstood her meaning and wanted to explain, Auntie. Wen Lichu saw Wen Chunya's face flustered and anxious, afraid of misunderstanding. She smiled and comforted him. I understand what you mean, I didn't misunderstand you, I just think what you said is very reasonable. When I walked all the way just now, I was also thinking about this matter. I'm just too soft-tempered, so I'm always bullied by the others in the village. If I were a bit tough, they wouldn't dare to bully me anymore. Wen Chunya was actually very happy when she heard Wen Lichu's words. After all, she couldn't protect her for the rest of her life. If she gets married in the future, she will leave the village. If she continues like this, I don't know how much bullying she will face in the village. I can't quench my thirst from afar. Her parents have a heart to protect me, but they can't always follow her. Wen Chunya was lost in thought, knowing that she had listened to her words. Even if she made any changes in the future, her appearance that did not match the original would not arouse her suspicion. She interrupted her contemplation and said, "All right, silly girl, let's go up the mountain." Wen Chunya regained her senses and nodded blankly. Wen Lichu walked in front of her, ignoring what Wen Chunya was thinking behind her. After all, she can't always live like Wen Lichu did before. She may have to slowly reveal her true self. Just as she was thinking, Wen Chunya ran up and looked at her seriously, saying, "Auntie, you will definitely do it." Wen Lichu's face showed a gentle smile and said, I will definitely do it." The two of them looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Suddenly, Chen Ermei's voice sounded behind her. "Wen Chunya, wait for me." A hint of annoyance flashed on Wen Chunya's face. Wen Lichu reached out and grabbed Wen Chunya's hand, running forward. Chen Ermei was stunned. What did the two of them mean? Wen Chunya was also a bit confused, running along while watching Wen Lichu holding her hand. "I don't know how long I ran until I realized that Chen Ermei didn't chase after me, and then the two stopped." Wen Chunya gasped for breath and asked, "Auntie, why do we have to run?" Wen Lichu also gasped for breath and answered, "I don't like her." Wen Chunya opened her mouth and looked at Wen Lichu. You know she wouldn't have done this before. It seems that Auntie's words about changing are not just words, but really about changing. Under Wen Chunya's shocked gaze, Wen Lichu said again, "She's too annoying. In my memory, Chen Ermei bullied her a lot, even though there were Wen Chunya blocking her back. People who don't like it don't need to get used to it, even if they are neighbors next door, they can't look up or down. But Wen Lichu is not the kind of person who wrongs herself." Wen Chunya agreed and said, "It's really annoying." And Chen Ermei, who had been abandoned by them, never expected to be treated like this by the two of them one day. After all, no matter how much they talked and didn't treat her, they never treated her like they do today. She can't handle it this time. When they react, there will be no trace of them. Angry Chen Ermei slammed her backpack onto the ground. After falling, she regretted it. Fortunately, she hadn't broken it yet. If it had broken, she would have skinned her. Just as Chen Ermei bent down to pick up the backpack basket, a boy's voice rang from behind. "Second sister, I just saw you throw the backpack basket." The ill-intentioned tone made Chen Ermei freeze. Chen Ermei said cunningly, "You're mistaken, I'm slippery." The boy rolled his eyes and said with a mischievous smile, "I see from beginning to end, second sister. If you let Milk know about this, would you be beaten?" When Chen Ermei heard her cousin's words, her teeth itched with hatred, but she dared not do anything to him. In their family, boys are treasures, while girls are losers. Just when Chen Ermei was caught by her cousin as a little leverage. Wen Lichu and Wen Chunya have already started picking firewood on the mountain. The two also dug some wild talents and picked up some mushrooms and fungus. This place has never been visited before, and there are many things covered by weeds. If you don't get close, you won't be able to find them. When Chunya said happily, "Auntie, we made a profit. The things I picked up today are enough for their family to eat for 2 or 3 days. After all, it's good to pick up a meal on a regular basis." Wen Lichu was also very happy. After all, wild fungus and mushrooms are also organic and pollution-free, and they are very valuable in future generations. Now that you can eat here, you have indeed made a profit. Indeed, you can pick up more firewood, there's no rush. When Chunya nodded and said, "Okay." After all, firewood can be picked up later, but if these things are picked up later, they will probably be picked up by someone. Since they have discovered this place, I believe it won't be long before someone else will also discover it. So the best thing is to pick up as much as you can now. Pick more and you'll have an extra day of food to eat. Half of what Wen Li picked up at the beginning was placed in Wen Chunya's basket. She didn't want so many wild vegetables, she only wanted black fungus and mushrooms. End of this chapter.